the harder we grab onto, the concept of survival instead of being alive, we die quickly. And so we need to survive this pandemic, became kind of the battle call. But in the effort to survive, we all stopped living. We stopped having community. We stopped, touching our own loved ones that were dying in hospitals. We stopped the humanity of humanism. We stopped. And so we became some sort of strange version of ourselves at the societal level. Fortunately, there was the opposite reaction to it, though. At the individual levels, we saw so many amazing people stepping up to do incredible things during the pandemic. We saw new nonprofits and new NGOs, and we saw new, science narratives coming up, and new online platforms being created in real time to create, free voice and ability to exchange information. And so that was the reaction. But I think your statement around monoculture isn't really important, because we were talking about nature pushing for biodiversity at every level, and to realize that humans are doing monoculture at every level is pretty extraordinary. At the cellular level, gut health is kind of a funny example of it. As we run around saying you need to plant these 3 or 4 species of bacteria in your gut for health. So we started 30 years ago a probiotic industry that's now $47 billion a year of probiotics sold globally. $47 billion of monoculture happening in the intestines of humans around the world. We had severe concerns about that approach in medicine. Everybody who was in the gut health microbiome stuff had severe concerns about that approach for years. And finally, the studies got done and published. Studies started in 2014, got published in 2018, showing that the monoculture of 3 species of bacteria in high numbers of through a probiotic was having the same suppression effect as antibiotics were on the gut microbiome. And so here we are running around saying, here's the antidote to antibiotics, and it's a monoculture approach, and therefore it turns out to be just as harmful. At the same time, in the 1970s, that we were running around saying, here's your probiotics, and you should drink this, eat this, whatever, we were running around telling people, here's the 3 crops you can grow. You can pick soybeans, corn, and wheat. So go do those 3 things. In some climates, it was sugarcane, canola, and, name your third one. It could be sugar beets or whatever it is. And the interesting thing is, none of those 3 things tend to end up in large volumes on a human plate, and for the most part, they're ending up as some sort of processed chemical, ethanol for gasoline, plastics for the apparel industry, processed chemicals like high fructose corn syrup for our packaged and processed consumer goods. All of this. And so you say, here's the 3 crops that you need to go grow so that you can feed the world, because there's world hunger and it must be due to a shortage of crops. You can grow more crops if you just grow corn for 10,000 acres than if you're trying to grow 7 species. You're so inefficient. If you would grow 1, you'd be so efficient. You could just sow 1 seed for thousands of acres. You could use 1 machine to harvest all of that. You could use 1 supply chain to go store that in 1 grain elevator up the road. It's all very efficient if you just go to monoculture, and we need to feed the world. And so farmers were told that in the Midwest. They were like, the world is starving. It's up to you to save the day here. It was this slippery slope of this promise of this altruism of feed the world that allowed them to continue their path. And I think at the same time, we did that to doctors. We gave them this altruistic belief: if the world is dying, you need to go save the world. And so here's your altruistic mission. Here's the antibiotics that will cure all diseases. Here's the vaccines that will prevent all diseases. Here's the 3 things you're allowed to do for depression, or here's the 3 things you're allowed to do for cancer, radiation, surgery, or chemotherapy. And so we've created these monoculture type behaviors, toolkits, prescriptions across all of these levels. And it would be one thing if we just allowed it to stop there, but then the fact that we do that in our day-to-day social interactions, and we, in the face of a pandemic of isolation, you would think that at that moment we would have reacted and said, good Lord, we just all need to be connected. Let's just talk. Let's all connect. Let's all compare notes. Let's all start talking about the future that we all want to see. And instead, we created a new phenomenon that has now been called cancel culture. And so we did that in the middle of a pandemic. We decided, well, if somebody has a differing viewpoint on social media, I'm going to cancel them out of my life. I'm going to demonize them, just as it's just astounding that this monotony is embraced at every level of humanity. We are so afraid of hearing an opposite, viewpoint, or an opposite, perspective. We get hives to it. We're so reactive to something slightly outside of our own perspective, which is probably a pretty deep sign of insecurity, right? Like, we must be pretty fearful of this. We must have a deep sense of the instability of the reality that we're trying to maintain if we're so adverse to a slight difference of opinion.